Tom.
Yeah. So I was going to kick us off, if you don't mind, and tell you a little bit about me and what I want to get out of this meeting. And I'd love to, I think it spurs engagement. I'd love to go around the room if you don't mind. And I'd love to know what company you're with, what you do with the company, and what you want to get out of this meeting. It could be anything. But my name's Grasso. I'm Global Relationship Manager. I work out of our New York and Boston, our Waltham office, excuse me. And what I'm hoping to learn a little bit more about is what you guys want to get out of this meeting today regarding how you differentiate yourself as an employer of choice, how you're winning the war for talent today from a branding perspective. Thanks for coming.
Hi, I'm Maureen O'Reilly. I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition at National Grid. And I'm always up for hearing helpful tips and what other people are doing as far as best practices for employer of choice.
I'm Marion, I'm Director of Talent Acquisition with National Grid as well, Maureen. And I think I'm interested in learning more about increasing our brand. So,
Yeah. Hi, I'm Mary Sosnowski. I'm with TMP Worldwide, Client Strategy, and to echo Chris, I'm interested
I'm Margaret Stockton with the professional organization of certification and entry with my amazing folks and I work well as HR always needing to stay on top of what
I'm Jennifer Williams. I am the Director of HR at a small company called NQA. We have about 100 employees all together, so it feels very much like a startup. And I'm the Director of Arts and Recruiting team. I work with the benefits team. I work as consultant and compliance. I ask people to get some additional strategies on practice. Hannah, I'm the Director of HR at Cider in Boston. I am today rather than hearing about challenges and successes. I'm mentioned
so I really want to just see how people do it. I've seen it on magazines and always really want to get on top.
My name is Paola Contini from American Alarm Communications in Arlington, HR generalist. I am happy to be out of the office for a little bit. Tom knows that feeling and why I feel that way. But this also gets to the other people who are going on. I'm Erin Hassett. I work with Gallagher with Tom. And I know all about Gallagher, but I'm hear about I'm Emily Conley. I work in talent acquisition at Tesaro. We're an oncology biotech, and I'm just interested in enhancing our employer brand and possibly, getting our employees more engaged in that process as well.
Hi, I'm Karen Baltham. I'm head of talent acquisition in America, and the reason I'm here is when I tell you my company name, it will be very clear. So I work for HDA Obstetric. That is what we are told on yourself. It is the umbrella company in the spread out over stigma materials who are good function. And I have a team of people who are trying to hire the best talent, and that's how
Rob, can we help?
Oh, that seminar's down the hall.
Good luck to your seminar. So there is this new brand on all of our buildings, really pretty dynamic M,
so we lean on that image, but still when we go to have a phone screen with somebody, depends on what they're doing. That's lifeline, healthcare, technology, and then it's also those non-tech roles function that hire for. So in hiring, we will shift how we explain things. At the end of the day, how do we either leverage technology, stop doing one thing, how do we get out there in the market?
So you need to lower your expectations, like our friend down the end who just wanted to get out of the office.
The coffee's pretty good.
Yeah, we'll talk.
Hi, I'm Jen Palacio. Partner for Four Sigma.
That's right. For the one division.
Yep. So I'm the life sciences sourcing partner, and to differentiate yourself and help the branding and get our name.
Jennifer just relocated back up to the Northeast from Tampa. What was she thinking?
Wow.
My name is Zia Canner. I'm an account director at Upstairs. So I work with a handful of clients to just get a deep understanding of general marketplace right now and what. I'm Wendy Pease. I own Rapport International, and I'll be speaking today. So thank you all for coming.
Yeah. Tom Porell, I'm with Gallagher, and I'll be also speaking. This has been an interesting exercise. I'm not a seminar speaker typically, and I had to learn, kind of put this whole presentation together and do the research on it, and it was very interesting. And I'll share, you'll understand why when I present, but thank you for coming.
I can go next. Dinah Ravarsky, VP of Digital Strategy for TMP. I also work right upstairs. I'm playing the part of IT specialist today, so hopefully nothing goes haywire. But in my day-to-day life, I deal with the attraction and engagement of our clients to candidates, specifically within the digital space. So I might be able to lend some insight as well. So happy to be here.
Dinah's also an artist by trade. She put together these great signage that I just found out our facilities team wants to actually adopt her template. So
I don't know why, but sure. Yeah, go for it.
Dinah will also be recording this. So you may hear us repeat your questions when the Q&A portion comes up. This way we can, everyone that we end up sharing this with can actually hear it. Mm-hmm. No video, it'll just be sound.
It's a slide.
We'll be able to share it, and we'll share it with all of you as well.
Morning, everybody. I'm Rob O'Keefe. I'm also with TNP Worldwide. I'm going to be talking in just a minute, so I'll elaborate a little bit more and get going. My expectations, like a friend who just wanted out of the office, very modest. I was hoping for maybe a sandwich, a glass of water, something like that. My expectations have been met, so I'm 100% satisfied. Well done. Well done, Chris.
Rob's in a great mood tonight. The Celtics blew out the Bulls last night, but they got a tough matchup against Toronto, so he's a little skeptical, but hopefully the team's back with that. Couple of fun facts. Behind the stadium seating is the restroom. If you guys need to use that, by all means. Let's make this engaging and fun. Again, it'll be recorded, so you guys can hear yourself on the recording share. Aaron wanted me to share that we're going to be you're going to be certified. So SHRM HRCI certification at the end. Don't forget to grab that. If anyone needs to leave early, we understand. I'm just going to see Aaron. She has that for you. And again, let's make this engaging. We're going to do a Q&A piece after each section. We're going to walk you through the top 10 steps to become an employer of choice. And then we're going to do a moderation portion at the end. And let's all network, exchange business cards, connect on LinkedIn. And I'm hoping that you guys all gain a bunch of great nuggets in this meeting today. Thanks again for coming. Rob, want to take it away?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Dinah. Thank you, everybody. So as I mentioned, I'm Rob O'Keefe, Vice President of Brand Strategy here at TMP. And I've been doing this for a long time, actually since the last century. I like to say that because it sounds more impressive than just say 20 or 30 years, right? But yeah, since the 80s and 90s. But the 90s, even though that's really when employer brands took off, that was sort of the era. It was very different back then because back then we were watching Will and Grace, and we were debating NAFTA. So it's just, is that going right over everybody's head? Okay. Oh. All right. Will and Grace are back on, and we're still debating that. Okay. But at any rate, we'll just jump right into this thing. I've done work with companies, both international and local. In the local area, we've just completed a project with Fresenius Medical Care in North America. They're just down the street. It was a really good project. And then about a year or two ago, we did a project with Thermo Fisher Scientific. When we started, they were in this old dilapidated brick building that's since been torn down. And now they're in this beautiful new building. And I think it's all because of the value proposition we developed for them. So if you're looking to upgrade your...
No.
Yeah, it's okay now.
Right here.
All right.
There we go.
Look at that. Okay. So if you're looking to upgrade your facility, it's a great place to start. So I'm going to take you through a few sort of salient points around employer brand and value proposition work. If you have any questions, just go ahead and jump in at any time. The essence of any employer brand is really the employer value proposition, right? The EVP. Is everybody familiar with that idea, that concept of an EVP? Is that new to anybody? So I want to make sure that I'm, not overlooking things that. Please. Okay. So when you think about any organization or any product or any service, right? There's certain attributes that you want people, your consumers, whoever they might be, to keep in mind to differentiate you, all right? So think about it from the standpoint of automobiles. If you think about a Volvo, what comes to mind for you when you think of a Volvo?
Safety.
Right, okay, so that would be their value proposition for the Volvo, all right? When you think about a Maserati, what would come to mind? Yeah, right, really high luxury and car. Toyota, maybe just quality and affordability. So you take that idea and you extrapolate that for what it's like to work at an organization, the employment experience. You distill that down. Right? And that can be very challenging because most organizations are part of a sector in which there are similar organizations doing the same thing, at least from a product standpoint. So, for example, within healthcare, one hospital versus another, other than location and perhaps the services that they offer, how do you differentiate them, right? And again, it all comes down to that employment experience and really teasing out the nuances and the nuggets that you discover through whatever means you're using, whether that's existing research, new research, whatever the case may be. And I love a good laser pointer. So once you have all of that information, you distill out those themes, those reasons to believe, right? Because you don't want to be putting out stuff that you're just making up that turns into a revolving door for you, people leaving because you're not meeting their expectations. So you typically distill those into a set of pillars, right? And then further, you take those pillars and you distill them down to some core positioning. I'll give you an example in just a second. And that's the essence of your EVP. It's kind of what you keep in mind. So you were talking before about the complexity of your company's name, right? What we'd want to do is replace the complexity of your company's name with the simplicity of what that employment experience is bringing to you as an individual, right? So while the brand identity might be a stumbling block, the value proposition itself would coalesce and really resonate, if you will, in a way that would be immediately understood, right? But having said that, and I think you were even talking about different audiences that you were after, and I think someone over here is talking about engineers, trying to get them. Job categories have their own drivers and motivations. And so even when you have a central value proposition, you still need to develop a messaging framework, right? So if you're talking about attracting somebody in sales, they're likely going to have different drivers than somebody in engineering, right? That doesn't mean that you come up with 17 different value propositions. You still come up with one, but then you tease out, how do I message that in a way that's really going to resonate with that individual, okay? Make sense so far? Okay. So keeping that in mind, when you have a value proposition, there's a few things that you want to think about when you're putting it together. And that is around your credibility. Is it something that you can live up to? But also, is it showing your vision? Are you demonstrating the aspiration that you have for a company? because you don't want to develop a value proposition that's simply valid for the next 6 months, right? You want to show something where people are going to look at that and say, I get where the company is going and I get where I can go as part of that company. Right? But in addition to that, you also have to think about, is it compelling and is it differentiating? So if it's not something that is really going to resonate with your audience, it doesn't matter. So a value proposition based on, let's say, well, we pay decent and we have okay benefits, that's not particularly compelling, right? So you wouldn't build a value proposition on something as basic as that. However, there was an organization I worked with out in the West Coast, a technology company, and their value proposition came down to control your future, right? It's a very empowering idea, right? And it's very forward-looking. And that, something like that has a lot of resonance with the technology audience. And then, is it differentiating? Does it set you apart? So again, when you're trying to attract people from other organizations in the same sector, that becomes rather critical. What is it that's specific about you? And sometimes that can be as basic as the vision of the organization, or it could be as powerful as the purpose of the organization. So I heard you mention before that you're with Perkins, right? Well, the idea of purpose has really caught on over the last 5 years. Every organization is trying to wrap their value proposition around this idea of what's our greater purpose above and beyond making money and increasing sales, whatever the case may be. And part of that has to do with where we are as a culture, but it also has to do with where we are as far as recruiting different generations. And while it may seem rather obvious for your organization to wrap around purpose, I would actually say that each of you probably has an opportunity to include purpose in some form or another in what it is that you're doing. In your case, it could be something as basic as allowing people to live the lives that they want to live in New England. I mean, in particular, right? I think in your organization, the end result of what it is that you're doing certainly provides an amazing purpose. So it's something to keep in mind as you move forward. I mentioned this messaging framework, and this is really where employer brand work has evolved to another level of precision and application, if you will, versus where it was, let's say, 10 years ago. Messaging framework is more than just understanding the job category that you're trying to attract. It can be about understanding your candidate motivation and their profiles that go with that. It can be about message guidelines, which is a breakout either geographically, demographically, or by job category on what is compelling to each of those audiences. Or it can be about creating personas. And this last one, personas, just a show of hands. How many here have heard of the idea of using personas in this kind of work? Okay, a few, right? Again, 5 years ago, there would have been no hands, all right, on that. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about personas, and you'll see why it is that they can be so powerful. Oh, that one. So in order to really get the most out of your employer brand, you need to move beyond just having a communication platform that conveys your value proposition. And the way to do that is with something we call branded CX, or branded candidate experience. And essentially what it does is it takes that creative platform that you've developed vis-a-vis your value proposition, and you intersect with the messaging framework to come up with what we refer to as branded candidate experience. And what branded candidate experience is about, it's about understanding the life cycle that candidates go through. So a candidate doesn't usually start off by applying, right? They usually have to start off by learning about your organization and what it is that it brings to the table and what the employment experience is like. So the kind of information they're looking for is about from first impressions, from attraction, whatever the case may be. Then once they have that in mind, then you move on to the next part of the life cycle, which is about inform and persuade. This is where you get the opportunity to really differentiate yourself. And then from there, then we go into the applying and the interviewing process. And from there, even in the onboarding process, to make sure that everything is lining up and you don't go from, wow, this is what I signed up for, to, oh, what did I sign up for, right? And you can even take that one step further and get into the whole sort of employee life cycle, if you will, around performance, et cetera, learning and development. But for today's conversation, we're just going to take it this far. So what is knowing this? How does this inform how it is that you bring your employer brand to life? Well, it means that when you look at candidate needs in each stage, you map out the messages, not just based on whether somebody's in sales or in engineering or in R&D or whatever the case may be, but which of these stages they're in. And in so doing, you're giving them the information they need and extracting the information they don't need. So you're more likely to create resonance than simply just to put stuff out there that may or may not have any meaning to the person that you're connecting with. So what do you use this for? There's a number of things, and you can see it right here. From attracting right fit candidates, I mentioned I worked with a couple of companies in the local area here, and one of them was having a high amount of turnover in an entry-level, non-degree required position, but that position was essential to them. And what we realized is that the people might have had the skills and the experience, but their motivations weren't aligned with what it is the company really needed from them. So by understanding what it is that we need on a basis that extends beyond what you typically see in a resume, we're able to convey and attract the right kind of people. You can also think about an organization going through culture change. And culture change isn't always something that, there's a definitive start and stop to it. Sometimes it's organic. Someone mentioned, forgive me, somebody talked about having a company of just 100 people, right? Yes. So right now, your culture is what it is. It's very tight-knit, whatever the case may be. But 5 years from now, it's probably going to feel a lot different. And you're going to have some legacy employees who are talking about, oh, remember how we used to do things back when we were 100 people, right? And now you have all these new people in, and they're going to be thinking, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I want to do things this way. So making sure that you have the right kind of people in mind for that anticipated culture change is important. Hard to fill candidates, that's in abundance. I mean, we're talking about unemployment of less than 4%, and it's actually much lower than 3% when you get into certain skill sets, which makes it impossible to find anybody short of kidnapping. Right? So with that in mind, that's where personas come into play. Like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then, there's other things as well. You can use it for content strategy, which makes perfect sense, and making sure that the candidate experience is what you want it to be throughout. So we're going to start off with the second step in this process, and that's candidate motivation profiles. Another raise your hands question. How many here have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Okay, right. It's pretty well known. It's actually been looked at and said that it doesn't really work like that when you come down to the way people think. But having said that, it was the inspiration, the structural component of it was the inspiration for developing candidate motivation profiles. And what we've done is, based on all of the work we've done over the years, we've taken a look at the primary motivators for candidates, and they fall into 8 categories. There's achievement seekers, autonomy seekers, certainty seekers, connection seekers, knowledge seekers, progression seekers, purpose seekers, and structure seekers. Now, individuals seldom are just one of those. It's usually a combination of things, but understanding what their motivations are and aligning those with what it is you're looking for can be very effective. And the way you can make this work is if you look at the desired attributes that you want from your candidates, and typically that can come from competency models, right? It can come from job descriptions, or it can just come from conversations with leaders. So here's an example where we connected with an organization, did our research, did our due diligence, and what we saw was that what they wanted in general from their candidates and employees was passion and commitment, a can-do attitude, hardworking self-starter, and someone who was empathetic and collaborative, right? And those line up really nicely with 3 motivation profiles. The first being purpose seekers. And we talked about this before. Purpose seekers are people who are looking to further the greater good and really make a difference above and beyond the financial component. Achievement seekers, they're the ones who really want to deliver results, and they find a lot of fulfillment in that. Now, you can look at that in different levels, right? It could be big results. It could even be sort of day-to-day results. That's not what's important. What's important is what it is that motivates. And then lastly, in this example, connection seekers. And these are people who are really trying to make personal connections, right? Or professional connections, like my friend Chris here. He's definitely a connection seeker, okay? So with that in mind, understanding that these are the motivation profiles we're looking for to get right fit candidates, what you can then do is take a look at your value proposition and your pillars that you've created, and the one pillar that's more purpose related, you'll want to elevate that idea for this particular audience, the purpose seekers. For those who are results oriented, you take a look at the elements of your EVP and elevate that for those, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's pretty common sense once you get down to the application, but the identification is what's really critical here. So here's an example. It's a very busy example, and because it's got so much information in it, it makes us look like we really know what we're talking about, right? So that's the primary purpose here. So let's take a look at somebody who is an achievement seeker. Again, they're looking to find fulfillment delivering results. And then what we want to do is we want to take a look at the 4 stages that we discussed. So in the attract stage, for messaging and content, right? And whether that content comes from you or whether it comes from employees, all of it falls underneath that category. So in this first stage, what we might talk about is market leadership, financial success, and product scope, right? Then, once the person moves along, we're going to evolve that, start talking about innovative products, customer focus, and best practice. Then, when we get into the apply stage, we might go back and reinforce market leadership, reinforce innovative products and customer focus. And then when we get into the onboarding stage, now that we're part of the company, we're really focusing on the customer focus, best practice, and quality, right? So all of these things help to, again, create the resonance that we're looking to manufacture in our communication. Make sense so far? Personas. All right, so let's talk about the mysterious idea of personas.
No, to
Oh, okay. I'm trying to bite my tongue and not say, do you want to share that with the rest of the class?
No,
Okay.
thank you.
So persona foundation building. The idea of a persona is that, again, it looks at the candidate as more than just a group of job skills and experience and education. You look at the whole purpose. Yes, please.
Just a quick question. Can you share the deck?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'll send a copy, if you guys are okay with it, I'll send a copy of the deck and recording to everyone.
That's great. I just wanted to check off.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I should have said that up front. You don't have to write furiously down everything that I say. In fact, most people don't. So around personas, the idea is to understand individuals by understanding a group of individuals. I know that seems kind of convoluted, but if you look at things such as demographics, if you look at things such as life stage, where somebody is, from being single to being retired, that whole sequence. If you look at their career stage from entry level to leadership level, when you mix all of that together, you really get a sense of this type of candidate. And we use that, we use the word persona to express that type, if you will. So here you'll see a couple of things that we'll take a look at. Again, the job and the skill sets, of course, but also geodemographics. Where are they? What's the gender? Is there anything from a race or ethnicity standpoint we want to keep in mind? But also their attitude towards your company. So for some of you, you may find job categories that look at your organization and say, man, I really want to work there. For others, it might be, that's the last place I want to work. And who knows why they're saying that, but that's there. And for still others, it might be, I didn't even think of it as a possibility. Right? So understanding each of those attitudes helps you define the persona and what it is you need to communicate to those who make up that persona. So this is where this is the last slide I'll be speaking to you about here today. So this is the last, the third step, if you will, in this process. And what it deals with is making personas work with the branded candidate experience. So once again, we have our 4 stages: attraction, inform and persuade, application, and onboarding. Here's an example of a sales persona profile where we've done all of the research, and based on that research, we've come up with what we refer to as big questions that fit into each of these 4 areas. So the big questions are essentially, what is it that this persona would want to know at this stage? In the first stage, the attraction is, what does the company's future look like, right? That makes sense. You want to get a sense of where they're going. The second question is, what's the perception, performance of the company's products and services? Remember, this is somebody in sales. So in another job category, they might not be asking about products and services. They might be asking about something else. And we move on to the next set. And here it's, what is the company's vision and values? Because now you're starting to create differentiation. And something really basic, will I advance here? People in sales want to know, where it is that's ahead for them, either from a performance standpoint or from a career standpoint. And then on the application stage, what's the compensation plan, right? That's a great place to bring that up. You don't necessarily want to be talking about that in the attraction, the inform, when you're really looking to separate yourself. And then finally, in the onboarding stage, you reinforce things around the company values and what does the company's future look like. And all of the channels that you're aware of are brought into play when you're bringing up this messaging and this content, from social media to emails to talent brew to trans, whatever the case may be. And so in retrospect, or in recap, I should say, the first 3 steps you want to consider are defining your value proposition, understanding the motivations of your candidates, and finally, creating personas. Now, let me just say one last thing about personas. You don't want to create a persona for every single opening you have. You'll just collapse under the weight of that complexity. Utilize them for the ones, the job opportunities that are really hard to fill, whatever the cause may be. And if every one of your jobs is hard to fill, well, that's another conversation entirely, right? So anyway, I'm going to pause at this moment to see if there's any other questions. And from there, we're going to move on to the 4 C's for diversity and inclusion, which actually none of those words start with C, so I'm confused already. No. Any questions?
Can I make a request? Could we kind of pull down some of these shades just so we can see the color that matter?
Oh, sure.
Are there any questions for Rob? Or do you want to take the time to tie those in?
So the question is, do you tie in the EVP and the mission statement together?
So the value proposition is there to, I have to step back over.
Yeah.
That's what the recording is. So the value proposition is there to encapsulate the employment experience. So think about all the things that go underneath that broad heading, right? And mission is one of those things, right? Because it defines why it is that the company exists. And that's certainly a key element for a value proposition. Things like vision also. Learning and development, what's the word I'm looking for? Performance management. All of those essential ideas roll up into it. Now, depending on what that mission statement is, it may or may not get high priority in the value proposition. I've seen a lot of mission statements and values, if you will, at organizations, which quite frankly, I could take them off of that billboard, move them over to another company, and most people wouldn't even notice the difference other than the brand identity changing. So you really have to be critical in the way that you look at that and make sure that it's something worth expounding upon. Make sense?
Any other questions?
No, just to bounce off that.
Sure.
Now 3 different companies that there's certainly different brands, right? Companies. then that takes a look at a lot of times the internal people. It holds up a whole lot of different things. Recruitment brings. So my question would be, how often do you see these two things run parallel versus together?
Yeah.
And what are the watch outs that you have if you're trying to do a recruitment brand and you don't have this other side aligned?
Sure. Well, first of all, you need to have the other side aligned, all right? Because if what you're telling potential employees and current employees doesn't align with the larger message coming out of the organization, then how do they know what's real and what's not real? I mean, on a very basic level. The degree to which you're talking about alignment depends on whether we're talking about strategic alignment or executional alignment, all right? So strategic alignment from the standpoint of, does the positioning for recruitment basically end up attracting the kind of people that who will naturally fulfill the positioning of your organization? That's the kind of strategic alignment you need to have, all right? From an executional standpoint, now you start talking about things like brand identity and color palette and all of that. The basics like brand identity and color palette, they should be aligned. But when you start going into campaigns themselves, it's not necessary. As long as what you're putting out there from a recruitment standpoint is ownable and points to the strategy that's been agreed upon, you're fine. It's very unusual to see a consumer-facing or B2B-facing brand that conveys recruitment messaging in a way that's compelling. Does that make sense? And things to watch out for: overzealous marketing departments who want control of everything to the point where, I'll give you an example. For all organizations, customers are important, right? Sometimes what happens in engagements like this is when marketing gets involved, they want the recruitment brand to simply be there to reinforce the product, service, or corporate brand, right? And so they want it to be more about the end user, the customer, than about the people you're trying to attract. And when that happens, you really lose the whole aspect of the employment value proposition, right? It just becomes an echo chamber, if you will, as opposed to something that you want to resonate with the target audience you're looking at. So hopefully that clears up a couple of things. Any other questions? All right, let's go on to the 4 C's.
Okay. Oh, do you want to take a break? Anybody want to take a 5-minute break before we go on? All right. Okay, we're going on. All right, so first off, I'm Wendy Pease from Rapport International. I own it, and we provide, well, our passion and mission is connecting people across languages and cultures. So we provide written translation, spoken interpretation, cultural adaptation, anything going from one language to another. And it shows in our logo, it's 2 hands working together to connect. So let's talk. For you. There we go. Okay, so today's was the 10 criteria for the employer of choice. So Rob just spoke about the branded candidate experience, motivations, personas. I'm going to get more into the culture, connections, and inclusions. And we have number 10 is communications, because all of us are going to talk about that. And we all actually end up talking about culture too. So here are the 4 C's. First, it's about connecting, reaching out, making sure the language is there. And culture, communicate, and then how are you actually including the people that you're bringing in? First, need to talk about diversity. When this first became a buzzword, it was diversity. There wasn't any talk about inclusion. There weren't very many metrics on it. Now they're showing that financially there is a big reward for it. So if you have diversity, you're 35% more likely to have higher returns. Even at the senior leadership, they're measuring every 10% increase. You're actually bringing it down to the bottom line. And it helps win in the talent wars, because if you're a diverse company and you can show that, you're actually
attracting the cream of the crop to come in and work for you.
So I understand that the financial rewards you're talking about back to the company, their bottom line profitability.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So they're tracking it now. You know, you have women, you know, just having women in your senior leadership and feeling included and participating in the company, you're going to have 15% higher returns. So it used to be a good thing and a should do, but now it's financially, they're actually tracking it. They're also tracking that if you don't have diversity, you're not just, you know, going along with the crowd, you're at the bottom of the returns. So there is a payoff, and it's becoming a competitive differentiator for actually hiring and pulling people in. Okay, so Rob, you can participate in this. This is a fun thing. These are words that were used in recruitment materials. And so the first is care deeply and lasting relationships. I want you to think about what companies these would apply to. Insatiably and competing, or maniacal and wickedly. Any ideas of who might go with these companies? Take a guess on the first one.
Healthcare?
Care.com is a good guess. Healthcare is a good guess.
You know, hospitals, nursing homes.
So you're thinking about it in industry and something with it in their name. Okay, now let's break it down. These are 3 technology companies. Okay, so the first one is Slack. Have you heard of Slack? No, so Slack is a company that's fairly new. It's going crazy. It's supposed to replace email. It's like a platform for communication that you can, it's like a chat inside and outside your organization. Second one, Microsoft. Third one is Amazon. So I can already tell which one I'm drawn to by knowing who I am. And so just writing these types of things in, you know, it's back to Rob's knowing your persona and what you're trying to attract. Just with these 3 words for each company, you can develop a flavor already. Okay, so I want to dig into a little bit more on Slack as an example of what I'm talking about for diversity. So they made a conscious decision that they were going to be a diverse company from the start. So they did it with the brand, the recruitment materials they were using, the words, and then they wanted to pull people in and not bring in any bias or that risk of hiring people that look like you, talk like you, seem like you. So they decided to do a blind code review assignment. So they gave it as homework assignment. And as they were going through this, they realized that women with small children were having trouble completing this at home. So they gave the option, you can either do it at home or you can do it in the office. So this homework assignment had to be done. And then they had a rigorous checklist that was supposed to be very objective. So whoever was checking over it didn't know who had filled it out. Then they came up with behavioral interviews, which are you all familiar with behavioral interviews? I'm assuming from who the crowd is. Set to open them, and they trained the interviews on how to do it. And they said after a while, you could really weed out who could answer the questions well and who struggled with it. How this played out is they compared to the Microsoft, Google, and Facebook, is they have a lot more women in technology. The green is Slack, the blue is the other 3 companies, and they have more women in leadership. And as for underrepresented minorities, you can see they have a lot more there. They even have minority leadership. So you think, here's a company that looks very different than a traditional tech company. How did they do? I can't get over the math here. Since 2014, what is it now, 2018? 2018 minus 2014 is in 4 years. They're valued at $7.1 billion. They've got investments from all the top investment venture capital firms. They've got annualized recurring revenue, and they're trending to go public in 2019. So, you know, do they have an incredible technology, or have they really leveraged diversity and inclusion to really make their company work and figure out how to go? So I think this is just a stellar example. And you may say, oh, those companies are based out in California, they're more diverse, in New England we're not. So I popped this slide up. It's hard to see, but the point is what's highlighted is our total increase in population in Massachusetts has been 4.8%. Of that increase, 4.5% is from international migration. So if you think of immigration, you know, crossing the borders, uneducated, you know, a burden to society, all the statistics, it shows it's completely wrong, particularly in this area. We have so many immigrants coming into the top universities here that it's an untapped market coming in. So making sure, yeah, go ahead.
Interesting you're going that direction, because I know that there's between visas and green cards, the processing, and now with, you know, different government regulations, this is a very difficult thing to master. It's a whole lot of money and time and resources. So just curious of the future message in, you know, simulating, you know, migration, as you call it, into a lot of US-based companies. What you see in the future there.
Right. So the whole green card, work permit, getting people
How
in.
that actually stands up is different than look at all of the opportunity of talent here in the United States. How that actually stands up. I know the green card, definitely.
Yes. Yes. The whole green card, immigrants coming into work. You know, now you're coming into lobbying, government, politics, and get out there, because immigrants aren't a strain on our businesses. You're seeing it now. You're having a hard time hiring. So, you know, talk to your representatives. Make sure you're getting out there and getting the PR that you need employees, and that immigrants coming in that are educated and capable of doing these jobs are people that we want to bring in, because it's going to help our company. So it is a struggle, and there's a lot of businesses that are having a hard time getting the people in, and that's the anti-immigration that we have going on now. So yeah, until some policies change on that. But you know, we have had people going up. So if you can already find immigrants, or if you've got somebody, you know, one spouse that's over here working that's educated, there might be a good chance that the spouse is educated. So can you find those people and give them a flexible work schedule, or make your company comfortable for them to come to as an immigrant? Okay, so just laying the background there. Let's talk about connecting. Now, it's not just immigrants, but there's a lot of different target groups. There's the, you know, LGBTQ, there's the different ages that you can talk about. And I'm gonna show you some pictures of recognizing your public face. So what, you know, you step back and actually see what you're putting out there. And do you know the difference between inclusion and diversity? So diversity is making sure you have people that look different and are different. Inclusion is how do you make them feel welcome, so it's not that revolving door again of people leaving, because if they don't feel comfortable and included, they will leave. So there's a lot of steps to do there. And then I'll get a little bit in the presentation on language, is how do you hire people and have them work within the United States if they don't speak English. All right, so I didn't put the company name up here, but I did take a picture, screenshot of their upper management. Now, does this look like a welcoming place to be? You know, as what I see here is a bunch of experienced white men. I happen to love white men. I have a lot of friends, and, you know, work well with them. But I've also been the only woman sitting at an executive table where I might get talked over, or I might not be heard, or, you know, I might not understand the language that's going on. I went to business school. I have an MBA from Dartmouth, so I was certainly working in a lot of work groups there. This is not going to be a place that feels real welcoming to a lot of people. All right, look at this one. It's a bit hard to see, but you've got the white men up here with the woman, and then you have some diversity in women down here. And if you could see their titles, you'd see that they're in support roles. So again, you look at that and you say, you know, am I going to hit that traditional glass ceiling? Or is it really somebody that can play up in this area that's going to be promoted? Now look at this. This is a business school classmate of mine. I love him. He's adored. He's funny. He's the CFO. This is his leadership team. You got women, you got men, you got color. This sends a very direct message out to your field. And your recruits are looking at this. They're going to go look to see who's on your board of director, and they're going to look to see who your senior management is. So this is something that starts at the top. Yeah, I wanted to make a point about Flack. I'll get to that. All right. These are my sons. This is the gratuitous son picture. I have an unconscious bias against teenage boys. And my boys are teenagers right now. So it hits me front and center. You know, and I had to work in this industry. You look at your unconscious biases, and we all have them. Nobody can say, oh, I'm completely open to every culture, every type of person. You have something, and if you say you haven't, you just haven't looked deep enough. And so bringing it front and center and acknowledges it means that you can work through these unconscious biases. So, you know, in HR, if you haven't done some of this work, it's work worth doing to make sure that you're not limiting when you're trying to recruit people in. So I'm starting to like teenage boys more and more and lose my bias against them because I adore my kids and I really enjoy their friends. But pay attention to it. All right, culture. I put this transvestite show up here because we have a client that is a big employer here in Boston, and they are so diverse, it's fabulous. You walk in and there is all types, and they have a big gay population that works there. They're getting the cream of the crop. I mean, if you take any group and you make your place a pleasant place to work, you got your choice of high performers. So HR went in, or diversity people went in and said, we want to have a transvestite show. And there's still mostly white men at the senior leadership. And they went, what? And I said, yeah, it's a historical thing. Back in the olden days when women weren't allowed to act, that the actors were all men, some of them had to dress up as women. So this is the historical significance of it. They did it. It was a ball. It was such a hit. So this is a type of wellness program, Hannah, we were talking about before. What things can you do for wellness programs to make people feel included? And this is one that they did, that they want to, you know, it worked for their culture because of what they built. So you think about what areas can you do? I've heard of other people doing potlucks, which is a very American thing, but then having people bring food in from their culture. You also have to be very sensitive, and this is something that we tiptoe around. We don't want to ask people if they're different, but there are ways that you can really train on how to have sensitive conversation. Look at the perks. You know, if you have a big gay population, healthcare isn't going to be as important as partner healthcare. I mean, childcare isn't going to be as important as partner healthcare. And then where your competencies are. So I throw this up as an example. Do you know the difference between Latino and Hispanic? Latino, anybody know? Or now that you've read it, you've got it figured out? Okay. If you're not familiar, you might think, oh, we've got a bunch of Spanish speakers that work, you know, in this area of the business. And so you lump them all together and you say they're Spanish speaking. Well, Latino refers to anybody that's from Latin America, south of us. That could also include Portuguese speakers from Brazil, but it would not include Spanish speakers that are from Spain. Whereas Hispanic are people that speak Spanish. So you can use that as a more general term. So Brazil would not be included in that. And I had a very interesting dinner. We hosted some people from World Boston, and there was somebody from Bolivia and somebody from Ecuador there. In the US, we think, oh, there's Spanish-speaking countries very similar. But they're not. People from Bolivia have more of a climate. They have apples. It was apple and pumpkin season, so they have apples that grow there. Whereas in Ecuador, it's tropical. So it was very interesting to hear them talk about the differences in countries and food and politically what was going on. And they were here for a conference on real news. So that went across all the countries. But, you know, this is sensitivity and knowledge, is understanding things like this and being able to ask. And then something that's popular at these companies is having interviews and asking what you can do to make people feel more heard, more included, more listened to, is having stay interviews rather than waiting till you've got that revolving door and you're finding out too late. Pull people in that you want to keep and have interviews with them. And it can be a very casual conversation that you have the power in HR to help influence and teach. Okay, so communicate. Okay, so I popped this up. This is what we work with our clients on, building a translation management plan. But this you can apply to any of the diverse populations that you're trying to get across. First, you have to have a strategy. You may not be able to target all diverse populations, but if you narrow it down to one, what is your communication strategy going to be to align with your corporate strategy? Okay, so if they're not in alignment and you don't have senior management buy-in, this is not going to succeed. So once you figure out the strategy, say your company wants to go after more women. Okay, so how are you going to communicate to talk to women to pull them in? So this is back to Rob's building a persona. Then technology, and let me switch it back to women who speak Spanish. Okay, so technology. You may decide that, you're in production manufacturing, and on the floor you want women who speak Spanish because you're working with small parts and they have small fingers. There's no HR lawyer in here, so I'm sure this is completely wrong legally, but I'm giving you an example if you want to target people that have certain skills. Okay, are you going to hire a shop manager that is bilingual English-Spanish, and that will do? Or do you want to leverage something like telephone interpreting to help facilitate calls? Do you have a benefits meeting that you have to provide an interpreter actually help facilitate the conversation? Do you need to give out written instructions or benefits materials? How are we going to translate that? How are we going to leverage technology to remember what we've translated, so next year when we do it again, we don't have to recreate all that? Is there a way to record the interpreter so if new people coming in Spanish? There's lots of different ways that you can use to communicate, even if you don't happen to speak the language. And then what's the process? Put the process in place. Leverage, resources that you can on helping to communicate to get the quality you need. If, I need to talk to Chris and he speaks Russian and he's telling me he's going to be out the next day, Google Translate's fine. It's a free resource you can pop up really quickly, and they're coming out with some other voice recognition ones. Quality is not there for anything that has to do with benefits or marketing or anything to affect your bottom line, but for simple communications back and forth, it really works well. And then over-communicate, because you already know how hard it is to communicate to your employees. I mean, how many times have we said, we sent that information out to you 5 times, how come you can't find it? So if you're doing that and you're having those problems in English, just think about in the other language. You're going to have to over-communicate and make sure you're hitting all the touch points. And then leveraging it your internal and your external. And conflict resolution, you will have conflict across cultures because there's just pure misunderstandings. You know, some cultures, it's about touching, how close you stand next to each other. So if you pick off a culture or a language you're going to target, you can do more intensive learning about that culture and understand how it works. And then if you build the sensitivity in to how to ask about these things, you're more likely to be successful. And then include, you know, where can you build supports in for people who are different? You know, mentorships with somebody who's like that person. Is there small groups that you can put together, consciously think about who might be an open person to communicate that might be different, that could pull people in. And this is where I wanted to talk about Slack, is they did all that without having a diversity person. So what they did, it was throughout their corporate culture that they included everybody in. So we've worked with companies that have diversity people that report up into the senior leadership, and senior leadership understands and they make it a priority. Those people are successful. The companies that we see that have their diversity person that may be reporting in a couple layers below into HR, company's not going to be successful, because that person in diversity has to have a voice, has to be listened to, and has to be able to talk without judgment or without criticism of how people are doing it. So Slack did it very successfully, where their senior leadership said, this is what we're going to do, and everybody was focused on that. Okay, so I love this quote. When it comes to the changing workforce, your organization faces breathtaking opportunities, brilliantly disguised as insoluble problems. So it's hard, but the payoff is certainly there. Okay, so I've covered culture, connections, inclusion. Questions? I'd love to open it up, hear experiences, or help in anything I can.
I was the leadership summit a couple but that the keynote speaker was talking about your organization. There's like a tendency for people who are in positions to be mentoring and to choose like them. So seeing people stuff. And here, or I guess like a general concern that in entry-level roles or of that, that their leadership are confused. Like how can you kind of break that mold and allow for more connections so that people who are diverse coming into your company have chances to advance?
Okay, so if I repeat the question, if you have entry-level people coming in that are diverse and you match them up with somebody who's like, no. You want to match them up with a mentor, but most of your senior leaders are the traditional white men who are going to be looking for, who get to choose and might be looking for people that are like them because it's easier to mentor them. How do you break that cycle?
Well, the question is more to misuse the phrase in terms of natural selection of that mentor. So we don't have a mentorship program. I don't expect it to develop. That's a natural way for all organizations to function. But if you lead most Bruins and then have entry-level guys who are either senior Bruins or senior Celtics, you're going to relate more to the Bruins guys and end up mentoring them. That's terrible.
No, so, okay. So your senior people, like the Bruins or the Celtics, and you've got your new people coming in and they're Bruins and Celtics, and the Celtics are naturally going to connect with the Celtics, and
Right.
the Bruins are naturally going to connect with the Bruins.
Right.
How do you cross-pollinate them?
My fear is that at leadership levels, we only have Bruins Celtics fans. So if we're bringing in Celtics fans, You're not getting mentored the same way, and they're not going to teach you. But you can train her, but you're actually good at it. And show me that's the question. Probably why they ask. Hey, Roman scan, did you know you did this last night? You might not be thinking that you're automatically doing some of these things, or you might, your priority might not be memorable.
Okay, so I think that's good feedback is how do you start, how do you train the trainer to pull the people in that are different to do it? The other thing that I'd add is there's difference between mentorship and sponsorship. Does anybody have mentors and sponsors in their companies? Yes, okay. So mentors are more people that you can go to and you can completely unload and you can say, okay, you know, for me, I'm a woman, there's all these men there, this happened, and I'm talking to another woman in a senior role, and she can say, okay, these are some of the things you can do. Now, a sponsor is somebody who is assigned to somebody that is always supposed to be looking out for opportunities for this person. So if you're assigned a sponsor, that's when you're talking about, okay, I accomplished this, and I'm really interested in this. And then your sponsor is supposed to keep an eye out for projects or areas that they could pull you into. So this same sponsor, like having an official sponsor might be a good idea where you can go and say, hey, you know, Joe Leader, we've got this person that's come in. I think they've got a lot of potential. This is where I'd like to see them grow. Can you have lunch once a month or once a quarter and find out their interest and see where you might be able to pull them in? So it's more formal and they don't have to get along as mentor, mentee, and real open, but then it's been articulated. Is that how you've seen it play out?
Yes.
With you?
So for me, I call them the advocates, and being in leadership meetings is absolutely about, you know, there's a person that was hired 3 years ago, they've done the following things, the following projects, and it's just in any setting of people who've got decision-making capability to catapult somebody's career, to be an advocate in that group. You've already got a seat at the table. Sponsors, advocates, it is the new way to really get people. It is different than mentoring.
It is, and I like that word advocating better because then you're not sponsoring. Sponsoring sounds so heavy, but advocating means, hey, you know, you're putting a good word for it.
Hallway, anyway, say something who respects you, and I say, "Can I on Jennifer?" He's now going to watch out for Jennifer. So there's this little nuance that happens, you know.
So Karen's exactly right, and to tie back to what Rob and Wendy said, we might, I don't think we coined the phrase, but brand ambassadors, your top performers in different disciplines, having them speak at onboarding and orientation, just from a credibility standpoint, I think morphs into being able to mentor voluntarily or formally.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Wendy? And Wendy, I know Tom and I have clients that have used your services for language translations. Do you kind of want to recap how the companies in the room could leverage your services, or do you think you pretty much covered it in the presentation?
Yeah, I think for you know, any HR communications for benefits, newsletters, communications, updates, websites, and then reaching out, you know, any introductions to marketing if you're doing any multilingual marketing. I love to help people working on the translation management plan, and that's free consulting that I do because we want to do the work, but if not, we're still open to helping. So thank you.
Yeah. Excellent. So I'm a good commercial for Wendy because last year we were doing this year we were doing an open enrollment meeting, very heavy Spanish population, don't know if it's Hispanic or Latino or what, but I reached out to Wendy, and we had a translator at the meeting. They did a terrific job. So kudos to Wendy and her organization.
Guys, I'm dating myself, but growing up in Connecticut, I was a big football fan, played football. I was a huge Doug Flutie fan growing up. And Tom actually played on the Doug Flutie team that beat the Miami team with the Hail Mary.
Yes.
Yeah. Great.
So I taught Doug everything he knows.
That's right.
Everything, it's all because of me. Thank you. My name's Tom Porell. I'm with Gallagher. You know, we get to the branding. By the way, this has been incredible content. I mean, amazing. We used to be Arthur J. Gallagher. Now we're just Gallagher. And it used to be on the benefit side, Gallagher Benefit Services. And on the property casualty side, we were something else. And now we're just Gallagher. And it's funny, when I came to Gallagher, I had a feeling we'd be going in this direction at some point. So I'm going to talk about the 5 C's. Okay, it was originally 3 C's, and then as I got into this presentation, I started to expand on the concept. Okay, and this all goes back to Gallagher does a national benefit survey. We have just north of 4,000 respondents that respond to this national survey, and it's just all about benefits. Okay, and it's dissected by industry, by geography, and so all this data comes from this survey. And so the 5 C's, we have culture, we have communication and engagement. Engagement's huge. You can't go anywhere without talking about engagement. And you know, wellness is all about engagement. We have coverage, right? So we have core coverage: health, dental, life, disability. We have voluntary. What I don't have up here are the perks. You know, what are the perks? How many people have gone to the perks convention, right? The perks, they now have a convention for perks. You know, all the discount programs and things of that nature. Cost, okay? Cost to the employee, cost to the company. You know, how does the company control those costs, okay? And then the last piece, and this was something that, you know, as I got into this, compliance. Okay, so when you look at employers of choice, so in our national benchmark survey, we identified in the top quartile of all the companies that responded, they all had these common themes. Okay, we call it, I think last year our marketing term was destination employer. Now it's employer of choice. Okay, but the companies that we designated as employers of choice all had these commonalities. Okay, look familiar? How many directors of HR? I know some. But if you ask a director of HR, what are your top priorities? Obviously, attracting and retaining employees, that's number one. That's why we have so many talent directors of talent. Controlling benefit costs. Employee engagement. Productivity, training and development. What's interesting is the last piece is culture. What you'll see in this presentation, culture is the number one priority when it all boils down. Okay, what's your culture? I'm going to share a little story. My partner and I, Marianne, you know, my partner and I were selling our agency 5 years ago. And we had a couple of suitors, a few suitors, I should say. And we went through the process of talking to the various companies and getting to know their senior leadership. And Bill and I took a ride down to New York, and we met with the leadership at Gallagher. And on the train ride back, Bill said, "Is there any doubt where we're going?" And I said, "No." It was instant. You know, we just felt that culturally we were a fit. Were they the best offer? No. No, and we had a partner. The other partner was outraged that we would actually choose Gallagher over the highest bid, and it a lot had to do with the culture. Okay, so what's the culture? It's you know, the health of the employee. It's training and development. You know, it's inclusion. Right? Sound familiar? Innovation, safety, performance. Okay, all these things add to the culture of an organization. And all of the top organizations have all these elements. Corporate responsibility. It's interesting that companies that have good cultures, they promote corporate responsibilities. And I'm gonna bring up Gallagher a lot because Gallagher prides itself on its culture. The fact that we have volunteer days that we promote volunteerism. We match donations. The top employers, they do these things. Okay. Is your company ethical? Right? There was a company back in the late 90s. It was the fastest growing, greatest company on the planet. People were dying to work there. People were making a fortune. It was the darling of Wall Street. That company was Enron. Okay? We all know what happened to Enron. All right? Do they have high ethics? There's an organization called the Ethisphere Institute, and they designate the top ethical companies in the world. What's interesting is companies that have the designation of top ethics outperform their peers almost 2 to 1. It's significant. Rob, here's your slide. Employee value proposition, right? Does your benefit strategy align with your employee value proposition? Okay. Do you have the package, the benefit package that allows, that says to your employee, we value you? Wellness, okay? Wellness is the big buzzword. Every companies are scrambling to put in wellness programs, and that touches on so many different elements, right? You have physical wellness, you have emotional wellness, financial wellness, okay? There are just so many parts of wellness, and that's all great. We want to offer a wellness program, okay? And they just, here we go. Here's our wellness program. Don't you love it? Look at it, sitting over here in a nice shiny box, okay? You've got to engage. You've got to engage the employees, and you've got to, it starts at the top, right? It starts at the top. It starts with the CEO and senior leadership that are embracing it, promoting it, communicating it, and you'll see that in the next slide. employers that have engaged employees, okay? And this is a segue into the next category, which is communication. Communication and engagement. Employees that are engaged, employers of choice outperform their peers by 2 to 1. Communication and engagement. Wendy, and after listening to you, I'm going to add another piece to this, which is the diversity piece. But think about when you're communicating to your employees, you have employees that run the gamut, not only from a diversity standpoint, but from the the Gen Y, the Gen X, the baby boomer. Right? The top performing, or the employers of choice, have communication strategies that speak to all these categories. Okay. They utilize tools, all the tools in the toolbox, right? Social media, one-on-one workshops, etc. Benefit communication. This is so critical. This is a piece that Gallagher used to be a brokerage firm. Now, if you look up Gallagher and you say, oh, what is Gallagher? We're a brokerage firm. Well, no, we're not. We're a communications company. No, we're not. We're compliant. We're a law firm. Okay. We have changed because employers of choice have so many diverse needs. All employers have diverse needs, but the employers of choice are saying, what more can you do for us? Okay, so communication. If you're not communicating your benefits well, okay, everyone communicates benefits. Every employer does. Right? Well, yeah, right. But how well do you communicate them? 60% of employees who don't understand their benefits will be gone in 2 years. These are some compelling statistics. You know that commercial, Captain Obvious? Who is it? Hotels.com, or I forget. Captain Obvious, right? Engaged, thriving employees perform better. Okay. So when you look at employers of choice, they have incredible communication strategies, particularly around employee benefits. Show me your package. I was going to actually put that up here, and I thought, well, I want to be tasteful here. Look familiar, right? Look familiar. Is this your employee benefit program? Okay, we have health, dental, life, disability, flexible spending account, 401k, HSA, worksite voluntary benefits. The one piece I didn't include up here, and I'm going to change this, perks. Perks are now becoming mainstream. Perks are things like discount movie tickets and all sorts of haircut people that come in and do haircuts. It's usually downtown. It's usually at the Heinz convention.
And Tom, Dinah and I work with a lot of companies in the suburbs that are trying to target engineers, programmers, developers, and they've had to really leverage perks, not just transportation and other things, but to really attract the young IT talent out of Cambridge and Boston into Needham and Newton and Waltham, and they've had to leverage the perks to actually convert them over.
Right. It's huge. And what's interesting about perks is most perk programs are free. It's just a way to market. I'll just use one quick story here. There's a company called Purchasing Power. Does anyone know what Purchasing Power is? So it's a really interesting, think of it as an Amazon.com for employers, that they can offer to their employees a SKU of about 200,000 product, or I'm sorry, 2 to 3,000 products, okay? That they can go online, purchase these products online, pay for them through payroll deduction. Payroll deduction, okay? And if the employee leaves, then Purchasing Power just deals directly with the employee to get paid the rest of the, whatever the outstanding balance is, okay? Gallagher is a client of Purchasing Power. Now, if you have credit, you're better off going to Amazon.com and purchasing something on, putting it on your credit card. But it's amazing how many companies, manufacturing, healthcare, nonprofit, have lower paid employees that have no credit. So this is a way that they can get the couch, they can get the refrigerator, they can purchase product, they can go on vacation, pay for it, payroll deduction without, because guess what, they don't have enough credit to do it on their own. So really interesting how this marketplace has evolved. So what's interesting about benefits, and I'm gonna talk about health insurance, because how many people, when they come in and sit in on an interview, how many people say, now your FSA, can I set aside $2,700 or is it capped lower? Has anyone ever said that? No, right? But when they talk about benefits, how's your health insurance? Who do you have? Do you have United, Cigna, Aetna, Blue Cross? What are the options? Do you have an HMO, PPO, EPO? Okay, so the medical plan is going to drive a lot of the decisions from a talent acquisition standpoint as it relates to benefits. Okay. What's interesting is when you look at an employer of choice, they typically have the lowest out-of-pocket costs for the employee. They offer at least a plan that has lower out-of-pocket costs than the other groups in our survey. So they're in the, we call it the top 25 quartile, where you look at the average deductible today is north of $1,500 for a single employee. Okay, double that for family. Employer of choice, the average deductible is $750. Okay, it's a lot lower. I have clients, high-tech clients. Healthcare is free at point of service. The employer picks up the deductible. The employer picks up co-pays, co-insurance. You're going to pay for it through your paycheck. You're actually better off taking the HSA option from a financial standpoint. But guess what? If you want this Cadillac, you can take the Cadillac. Okay, so it's interesting. Again, out-of-pocket costs. Okay, out-of-pocket costs. Employers of choice have lower out-of-pocket costs on their health plan than their peers or other companies. But you get into a cost issue, right? Is it affordable? Now, this is an interesting slide because when we talk cost, you have employer cost, you have employee cost. Employer of choice, they have to balance both. Okay? So it's great. We want to control our costs, but are we going to pass on the increase? Are we going to pass on the full increase to the employees? Or are we going to absorb some of it because we want to be an employer of choice? We don't want to harm our employees. But if you look at this, an employer of choice is going to be sitting right about here in terms of the percentage of the cost of benefits as a percentage of payroll, right? If you look at that, an employer of choice is sitting right up here and here, okay, where 30% or more of their comp is our benefits. 30%, but it's a relatively small percentage, right? Now you have other companies where, you know, kind of benefits is a necessary evil. We have to offer health insurance. So those are these folks here. The percentages, you know, as a percentage of compensation, it's very low. But an employer of choice, they're sitting up there at the top at 30% or more of compensation, okay? But again, it's a balancing act because you're now eating into the company's bottom line if you're offering a lot of rich benefits, okay? Employer of choice, they're sitting right here in terms of the employee contribution, okay? So an employer of choice, as we've designated through our survey, the employees are paying less out of their pocket for health insurance at companies that we designate as employer of choice.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Sorry if I missed this. How do you class, like, what are the criteria to make all
So what we've designated as employer of choice are companies that offer rich benefits. Where are they, you know, on a national scale? Where are they, you know, in terms of earnings and all that? So when we look at our benchmarking survey, we're also looking at other data outside of the survey to see, you know, are these companies performing well, et cetera.
So in terms of the tipping point you just mentioned, if you're spending like more than 30% of the salary on benefits, that's a designation that you guys have articulated rather than something that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question because again, we're taking it off the survey. We're also matching it up with other data, but just raw off the survey, we're saying these are the top companies from a pure benefits cost, out-of-pocket cost, value of benefit, you know, low out-of-pocket for employee in terms of point of service, low contribution, et cetera.
And that's right. The survey is getting sent out to the employees of the company, so they're saying, like, this program, this is what it is, or is it going to HR department?
It's going to the HR. Yeah. So the HR departments, what they're doing is they're responding to our survey. So yeah, we're not sending out surveys to the employees saying, hey, how do you value your company, your employer? These are simply based on the data that we're getting from the HR departments who are filling out the survey in terms of, you know, what are the benefits you offer? What do the employees pay? What, you know, what's your deductible? And it's all, you know, you choose different answers. It's you know there.
I guess the reason I'm asking is as a company sells benefits and organizes like that, having guys have identified what the employer choice based on what you're offering.
Not necessarily. It's you know it's based on just the survey data that we get back from our employers, and you know we're not saying, oh, you should buy, you know, you should do this or do that.
I think so yes, as a company, we want to offer the employees the most. Okay, and that does make us a good employee, but is there a direct correlation to retention, satisfaction, bottom line increase, or anything like that? I think that's what you're trying to get at, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, and it's through the data, you know, because it asks, what's your turnover?
Okay.
You know, average length of stay, you know, things of that nature. So has anyone, raise your hand, has anyone responded to?
It's a great your peers.
Yeah. Right, right. You know, and Hannah, to your point, and thank you for bringing that up. So if there's a correlation to companies as they fill out the data, the survey data, if they're answering questions and they're saying, well, we have no turnover, we you know, everything's great, but we spend or you know, as a percentage of compensation, benefits is 10%. We're not seeing that in the data. You know what I mean?
Right.
We're seeing a direct correlation to low turnover, you know, high percentage of comp goes towards benefits. So I had a hard time articulating that, so I apologize. Right. Yeah. No, it was a great question, and it's, you know, it's something. It'll be a slide in the next in the next presentation.
So
But-
just a time check.
Okay, perfect. I actually have one more slide after this, so we're done. But in terms of companies that focus on controlling the cost of their benefit program, and when I say benefit program, it's really health insurance is the biggest cost next to payroll for an HR department, right? I mean, health insurance is huge. So again, we've identified that an employer of choice will use a 3+ year strategy in controlling those costs versus other companies which are just like, oh, it's our renewal. Now we have to kind of scramble and you know, what are we doing? How are we, you know, it's just a year-to-year strategy. All right, my last slide, compliance. So this was something that when you think about compliance, and I'm not talking about really, I am talking ACA from an affordability standpoint, but I'm really talking compliance in terms of, are employees getting are their certificates available online, or you know, I want to know what my plan looks like. Where's my certificate of coverage? If it's not available, you're not compliant. Do the employees know the benefit program? Do they understand it? If you're just rolling them out and they don't know what all this stuff means, as an employer, you're at risk of being out of compliance. The employees, they don't know. It's not a matter of just saying, read this. It's now employers are responsible for communicating this to their employees, okay? So if you look at employers of choice, they have robust communication programs in place to communicate these benefits to their employees. Notices, something as simple as notices, the legal notices that have to go out every year to employees. Things of, and then the last piece is affordability under ACA. Obviously, if you're an employer of choice has affordable plans that meet all salary ranges within the organization. Thank you. Any questions? Kind of rush through that piece. All right.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
Hannah, you've inspired me to do something. A lot of clients that we work with, prospects clients, they say, hey, can you make us an employer of choice and help us win that war for talent and help us with quality of hiring? And I think everyone has their own definition of it. It's not as easy as just saying, hey, talk to Rob O'Keefe. He'll put together a strategy to make you an employer of choice. But I'm going to ask Tom to share some of that data with us so I can look at how they're defining an employer of choice versus companies we work with that every year they're a top employer of choice. Today, I think it's really marketing that does a lot of that, and it's all generated through employee surveys. Whereas years ago, Smuckers and Wegmans were always number one and number two. Amazing culture. They treated their employees like gold. Today, I'm seeing companies like Bright Horizons and other local and Google. And some of it is their culture and how they treat their employees, and some of it is really good marketing teams. So I'd like to compare and contrast what you're seeing as top employers versus some of the companies that are on the list that we get, and see how much of it's marketing.
And I'd like to take that and overlay that to the diversity employer of choice.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and see if there's any that overlap.
And you segue nicely to my next point. Some companies, they want to be a top employer of choice from a diversity perspective. They need help with diversity. Sometimes it's just to check the box, or sometimes it takes a good partner to truly understand what diversity means to Cesaro. We have to kind of bring that to life in the form of creative services and things.
I just wanted to chime in a little bit about, you really want to make, when you're thinking about being an employer, some of those bigger companies that are responding, you're getting those reports, down here. And so you might see, you may be getting data here, but there's a number of companies that are coming. And so if you wanted
Just finding out what they want too.
To how are you performing as a manager as well, and then once you as a look at the results of that, to share all of those things that we have and it contributes to the culture. If somebody has somebody in the company that is afraid of how to use a company, that all ties in.
It's a great point, Mark.
I want to bring up one of the things we're seeing that and I thought it was wonderful to hear about including women
steps would they do?
A huge obstacle. Well, I wouldn't say it's a huge obstacle, but it's certainly grapple with that. Culturally, it can be challenging to connect with
Yeah, Roche Brothers hires people. And then also there's a disability employment agency, and there's one out of Framingham. They say they have wheelchair bound people that are looking for jobs and boy, job, they're loyal and they're very bright and they're fine. So that's because we've actually reached out to look at hiring for employees for us.
Who's that?
You're gonna ask me the name, I'll find it.
Yeah, because I've heard of an organization.
Yeah. I have it back at the office.
Yeah.
We build career site.
there's definitely a lot of organizational to like attract for example, there's this job fair, so if you're thinking about anything, those are great. That's even for like an HR that worked for 5 years, whether use the right language, asking the right questions, and I'm sure like definitely want to play on the safe side. There are definitely a lot of resources out there getting some help. Right, so your goal is to be that we don't want that to be afraid I might do something. We go afraid I might not do something. We don't want that to be another goal. We have to know
Thank you.
I got to figure out how to get everyone's email. I think I can do it, but I'm going to
I
probably
know,
send
I
it.
have everybody.
I'm going to send it. Thank you. I'm going to send an email so all of you are on the email so you guys can engage with each other as you'd like. I'll include Wendy and Tom's info. I was just going to mention a lot of our clients want their career site to be accessible, and so we work with.
by law.
Yeah. We work with a company called Audio Eye, but there's a lot of vendors.
Yeah, there are different levels of it. There's a standard level of compliance, and our career sites are, of course, fully compliant. And then we have a head of accessibility who, based on whatever the needs of various clients are, can help ramp that up increasingly.
Yeah, I'm going to send the slides, and there was one other thing I was going to send. Forgive me.
The recording.
The recording. And everyone's contact info. I love these events because I love the network and I love to learn a bunch of stuff. And Tom and Wendy are amazing networkers. Tom, what's that networking event that I'm going to? Is it Jack Abbey's in Framingham?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's another good networking
It's the
event.
What's Brewing.
Yeah. What date is that? December 5th. So if you don't mind, can I include that also in the
Yes,
follow-up
please.
email? So if you guys want to keep this networking thing going. Rob, Wendy, Tom, any closing words? Dinah?
Well, first of all, thank you for coming out. And, it's always tough to take time off, especially this time of year when things are crazy. I know I learned a lot. Chris and Wendy and Rob, awesome job. This is terrific. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
don't forget to see Erin for your certification.
And please, as part of the wellness initiative, grab as many donuts as you can.
She threw a couple of crawlers in there for us today and some pumpkin muffins. Make it back to the office.